Human beings possess an innate biological drive to play, and the natural world offers a nearly infinite landscape for it. Yet today, engaging in that play requires a multi-billion-dollar global management industry to facilitate it. In agrarian systems, work and play formed a single fluid circle. Today, that flow is a rigid flowchart of public and commercial sectors. Maintaining this requires physical hardware, buildings and arenas, and operational software, the leadership and policy dictating the human experience inside those spaces. We often think of our spare time as true freedom. In reality, it is a residual byproduct. The hours we have left over are dictated almost entirely by the scheduling demands of modern work. Modern leisure operates as an engineered socio-political construct, specifically designed to manage those leftover hours. To understand how civic leaders draft modern cultural strategies, we have to trace how human play transitioned from a philosophical ideal into a formally organized industry. The profession of leisure management exists to navigate these constraints, providing a framework for participation in a world that no longer provides it naturally. We can map this evolution using a tracking framework that evaluates historical eras based on BRE metrics: work-leisure integration, class access, and primary utility. The Greeks developed the concept of schole, the root of school and scholar. To them, this structured free time was the primary objective of living. Philosophers like Aristotle and Plato argued that leisure was an active pursuit, the necessary environment for civic engagement and intellectual contemplation. But this ideal was restricted to an elite class of male citizens, supported by an enslaved underclass executing the manual labor the Greeks termed askolia. The Roman Empire adopted a sharply different approach. As Rome urbanized, the state utilized mass leisure as a mechanism for political pacification. Emperors provided food and spectacular, violent entertainment, the famous bread and circuses. This required massive state investment in public infrastructure. Rome built over 800 public baths and immense gymnasia to manage the free time of its urban population. Roman leisure was utilitarian. The goal was to maintain order and keep the public content, rather than to elevate the individual intellect. The Greek model pursued elite civic perfection, while the Roman model prioritized mass political pacification. The ancient world established two distinct foundations that still influence civic planners: leisure as individual elevation versus leisure as state-sponsored distraction. The fall of the Roman Empire triggered a collapse of public infrastructure across Europe, creating a vacuum filled by the rise of a new Benedictine work ethic. The Church rebranded arduous labor as a spiritual virtue. Survival work was integrated with religious devotion, reframing toil as a pathway to salvation. This ideological shift reordered social priorities, elevating labor while suppressing non-productive play. Centuries later, the Protestant Reformation accelerated this trend by explicitly targeting secular activities. Theologians like Martin Luther and John Calvin categorized festivals and unstructured play as dangerous idleness that detracted from godliness and moral discipline. This established a deep-seated cultural guilt associated with non-productive time that still persists in many societies today. Religious paradigms successfully coded work as the primary moral directive, permanently subordinating the concept of leisure to a secondary status. The transition accelerated with the Industrial Revolution, which uprooted rural populations and centralized them in urban manufacturing hubs. Season-based agricultural rhythms gave way to the rigid, unrelenting schedules of the factory floor. The new working class was thrust into a mechanical reality governed by the relentless pace of industrial production. Workers experienced a total loss of autonomy. Their space was restricted to crowded slums, and their time was consumed by grueling shifts. The physical and social degradation caused by these conditions eventually prompted Victorian social reformers and governments to intervene. These reformers did not advocate for a return to the Greek ideal of intellectual perfection. Instead, they pushed for recreation. In this industrial context, recreation meant specific activities designed to refresh the weary worker so they could return to the factory floor and perform more work. The industrial day was consumed almost entirely by factory hours, leaving only a tiny sliver of residual time for the individual. The introduction of the Saturday half-day in Britain created a predictable window of free time, marking the birth of mass leisure scheduling. With time off now synchronized across the working class, the immediate result was a surge in the mass consumption of highly structured spectator events. At the other end of the economic spectrum, sociologist Thorstein Veblen observed a different phenomenon, which he termed the leisure class. Veblen noted that capitalism transformed elite free time into conspicuous consumption. Wealthy industrialists used their leisure hours purely to signal their status and purchasing power. Industrialization destroyed the integrated rhythms of agrarian life. It replaced them with a heavily scheduled, class-stratified commodity market that required a dedicated industry to manage it. When we compress these historical inputs, we form the conceptual model for modern leisure management. Today's administrators operate in an environment defined by this synthesis. They balance Roman-style mass demand, navigate Protestant work ethic constraints, and solve industrial-era spatial deficits. This has resulted in a vast, interconnected leisure apparatus, ranging from domestic commercial media to global tourism networks. On a municipal scale, this apparatus manifests as sprawling public infrastructure, requiring complex zoning and specialized oversight. Because of this complexity, national governments now mandate that local authorities draft formal cultural strategies to plan and manage these spaces effectively. These policies treat leisure as essential social infrastructure, echoing the Greek focus on long-term civic development. However, because this system relies on highly engineered environments, it remains vulnerable to global shocks. Biological events or environmental crises can instantly paralyze these managed networks, cutting off public access to essential recreational spaces. This brings us back to the primary function of leisure management. It is the practice of designing the organizational software, the resilient leadership, inclusive programming, and adaptive policies required to keep the system running. The ultimate mandate of this industry is to design systems that actively restore the human capacity for self-fulfillment and community, carving out necessary space within our highly structured post-industrial landscape.